So inshallah we are going to start with Quran. Please recite another louder salawat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون إذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أو آباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الهيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حطاما فظلتم تفكهون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون ونحن أقرب إليه منكم ولكن لا تبصرون فلولا إن كنتم غير مدينين ترجعونها إن كنتم صادقين. فأما إن كان من المقربين فروح وريحان وجنة نعيم. وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين. وأما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتصلية جحيم. إن هذا لهو حق اليقين. فسبح باسم ربك العظيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Awesome. Thank you, Brother Mahdi, for reciting Surah Al-Waqi'. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, you all are well. Inshallah, we'll get started with poetry. So first I'll invite Brother Saeed for recitation in Farsi. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوات بر محمد و آل محمد. اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد و عجل فرجهم. اعوذ بالله من نفسی. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. و هو العلی العظیم. هو الاول و الآخر و الظاهر و الباطن و هو بكل شیء علیم. صدق الله العلی العظیم. اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. بإذن الله و رسوله و بإذن مولانا امیر المؤمنین. السلام علیک یا فاطمة الزهرا. السلام علیک یا خانم ام العباس یا ام البنین. السلام علیک یا حجة ابن الحسن. صلی الله علیک یا ابا عبدالله. Just for your information, the first part is not Marthia, is like a description of how a Shia is and what Shia means. And it was, I found it so practical for myself. گفتگو با عاشقان عشق است عشق. حرف اول در جهان عشق است عشق. سینه ام تنگ است از دلتنگیم. می دهد آزار بی فرهنگیم. عشق فرهنگ نبوغ عالم است. عشق الفاظ لسان آدم است. عشق یعنی سوختن، یعنی جنون. عشق یعنی جوشش رگ‌های خون. عشق‌هایی که ریایی گشته اند ضد آیین خدایی گشته اند. عاشقانی که ولایی گشته اند در خط مولا خدایی گشته اند. عاشقانی که ز خم جوشیده اند از خم عشق علی نوشیده اند. شیعه باید اگر آماده اید، شیعه باید شد اگر آزاده اید. شیعه باید شد نه اهل ننگ و عار. شیعه را هرگز مخوان بی بند و بار. قدرت ما در تجمع بودن است. عزت ما در تشیع بودن است. قدرت ما در تجمع بودن است. عزت ما در تشیع بودن است. تا علی بر کل عالم حاکم است. مکتب یکتا پرستی قائم است. شیعه بودن صدق در گفتارهاست، انعکاس بهترین رفتارهاست. شیعه بودن صدق در گفتارهاست، انعکاس بهترین رفتارهاست. شیعه بودن حقه و نیرنگ نیست، شیعه هرگز 10 دل و 10 رنگ نیست. شیعه بودن حقه و نیرنگ نیست، شیعه هرگز 10 دل و 10 رنگ نیست. شیعه یک اصل است نی فرضیه است، شیعه بودن شیوه مرضیه است. شیعه بودن شیوه مرضیه است. شیعه غیرتمند و عالی فطرت است، شیعه دارای شؤون عزت است. شیعه یک دم غافل از الله نیست، شیعه تا دارد علی گمراه نیست. شیعه بر درگاه حق رو کرده است، شیعه با عشق علی خو کرده است. شیعه کی سرپیچی از دین می کند، شیعه کی بر خلق توهین می کند. شیعه کی بر خلق توهین می کند. شیعه یعنی دور از سردرگمی، شیعه یعنی دور از سردرگمی. شیعه یعنی جایگاه مردمی، شیعه یعنی پنجره بر سوی نور. شیعه یعنی هوشیاری در امور. شیعه بودن نه سیاست بازی است، شیعه تنها مکتب خودسازی است. شیعه بودن نه سیاست بازی است، شیعه تنها مکتب خودسازی است. شیعه دستورالعمل در مذهب است، شیعه احیای علوم مکتب است. شیعه بودن حرف حق بشنفتن است، یا علی و یا محمد گفتن است. صلوات الله صلی علی محمد و آل محمد و عجل فرجهم. I have more for that Shia later, but I just made it short because of the time limitation. This part is a marthia for Bibi Al-Banin, salam Allah. قدم اگر خمید فدای سر حسین، جانم به لب رسید فدای سر حسین. البنین این شهر عاقبت شد مادر شهید فدای سر حسین. یک چند وقتی است در این شهر هیچ کس لبخند من ندید فدای سر حسین. هر جمله بشیر مرا پیر کرده است، مویم شده سفید فدای سر حسین. گلچین 4 تا گل گلخانه مرا چه نامردانه چید فدای سر حسین. هر شب به یاد عمر کم نازدانه ها اشکم به رخ چکید فدای سر حسین. هر شب به یاد تشنگی کودک رباب از خواب از سرم پرید فدای سر حسین. عباس پاسبان حرم شد به جای من، دستش اگر برید فدای سر حسین. گویند جا شده به مزار محقری آن قامت رشید فدای سر حسین. گویند جا شده به مزار محقری آن قامت رشید فدای سر حسین. السلام علیک یا اهل بیت النبوة، ذکرکم فی الذاکرین، اسماءکم فی الاسماء و ارواحکم فی الارواح. اللهم صل علی فاطمة و ابیها و بعلها و بنیها السر المستودع فیها بعدد ما احاط به علمک. صلوات بر محمد.
Ahsan, Fadawa Yasari Hussein. Inshallah, we'll have Brother Zorez for a station in Urdu. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
درود بر آل محمد صلوات. दी थी अम्मा ने जो पोशाक वो ला दो ज़ैनब, दी थी अम्मा ने जो पोशाक वो ला दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पिन्हा दो ज़ैनब। आज मक़तल में फ़क़त बात तुम्हारी होगी, अभी अम्मा से मुलाकात हमारी होगी, अभी अम्मा से मुलाकात हमारी होगी। कोई पैगाम अगर है तो सुना दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पिन्हा दो ज़ैनब। हाथ पाबंदे रसन बहना तुम्हारे होंगे, मुझको रह रह के ख्याल आता है लाशे से मेरे, मुझको रह रह के ख्याल आता है लाशे से मेरे। तीर किस तरह निकालोगी बता दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पिन्हा दो ज़ैनब। सामने अपने सकीना से उतरवा लो गोहर, सामने अपने सकीना से उतरवा लो गोहर, अभी कुछ देर में लुट जाएगा मजलूम का घर, अभी कुछ देर में लुट जाएगा मजलूम का घर। ये अमानत किसी गोशे में छुपा दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पिन्हा दो ज़ैनब। दी थी अम्मा ने जो पोशाक वो ला दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पिन्हा दो ज़ैनब। बाहर आने को न ख़ैमे से बाहर आने को न ख़ैमे से मैं कहता तुमको, होते अब्बास तो तकलीफ न देता तुमको, होते अब्बास तो तकलीफ न देता तुमको, बन के अब्बास मुझे जी पे बिठा दो ज़ैनब। कैद खाने की संभालो ये अमानत बीबी, गोद में लो इस मजलूम हो रुखसात बीबी, गोद में लो इसे मजलूम हो रुखसात बीबी। मेरा दामन मेरी बच्ची से छुड़ा दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पहना दो ज़ैनब। जब से अकबर गए बीनाई भी आँखों की गई, जब से अकबर गए बीनाई भी आँखों की गई, लाके दे दो अली असगर की निशानी कोई, लाके दे दो अली असगर की निशानी कोई। कुर्ता बेशीर का आँखों से लगा दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पहना दो ज़ैनब। घर से शबीर जनाजे की तरह से निकले, मौला घर से शबीर जनाजे की तरह से निकले, सभी रोते थे तकल्लुम दर खैमा पे खड़े, सभी रोते थे तकल्लुम दर खैमा पे खड़े। शह ने जिस दम कहा मरने की रज़ा दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पहना दो ज़ैनब। दी थी अम्मा ने जो पोशाक वो ला दो ज़ैनब, अपने हाथों से कफन मुझको पहना दो ज़ैनब। दरूद बर वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
Ahsan, Brother Zurez, Brother Saeed for reciting poetry. Inshallah, if we can all move towards the front as much as possible. And just a reminder, since we're starting a little bit late, we'll do Latmiya, inshallah, after Salat, since we'd have, I think, 3 Asharis today. So, Sheikh will go, inshallah, until Maghrib time. And then we'll do Salat after, Latmiya after Salat. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. One more loud salawat, please. اللهم صل على محمد. Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ذلك ومن يعظم حرمات الله فهو خير له عند ربه وأحلت لكم الأنعام إلا ما يتلى عليكم فاجتنبوا الرجس من الأوثان واجتنبوا قول الزور صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد For the love of our beloved prophets and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Last night we began our discussion on the topic of music and Islam's take on this issue. And we said at 5 different levels it is important to discuss this topic. First and foremost, the reality is that music today is something that we deal with 24/7. It really doesn't matter in what atmosphere you're entering. The typical approach is that music is going to be played. If you go to a restaurant to eat food, chances are there's music being played. If you go to school, chances are there's music being played. If you go to a sports complex, chances are there is music being played. If you simply go to your grocery store to pick up certain items, the chances are that music is being played. This is at the first level. At the second level, it is a topic that is nuanced, meaning that the reality is you don't come across 1 or 2 types of music. Music is on a full spectrum nowadays, and you'll find all sorts of music. In fact, every single emotion that the human being ever experiences in life, you might be able to find a type of music that invokes that emotion within the human being, because this is fundamentally the definition of music, setting aside sounds in order to create certain emotions and invoke certain emotions within the human being. Therefore, it is a nuanced topic. This is at the second level. At the third level, the reality is, as we're growing up, this issue is never properly discussed in its full depth and in its full breadth. So you'll find everyone has their own opinion on this topic. In fact, you'll find more opinions on what type of music is allowed in Islam and what type of music is considered haram in Islam than you will find on how to treat the common cold. You know, when it comes to the cold that we all experience from time to time, every family has their own special ingredients. You go to one family, they say you have to use this jushanda. If you don't use this jushanda, it's not going to get better. You go to another family, they say, no, you have to put water with lemon, with honey. You go to someone else, they say, no, forget about all of that. I have another recipe for you. And hence you find music is also of this sort. At the fourth level, it directly correlates with the camps who showed up on the 10th of Muharram and the lifestyles that each of them represented. Because you find in the lifestyle of Yazid the idea of engaging in haram entertainment. This was part of his lifestyle. And at the fifth point, in the fifth level, we said that if we understand this topic in its full depth, it will help us build trust with our faith and also help us understand other aspects of the religion as well. And hence we embarked on this journey. We said when we're going on this journey, you and I cannot sit there and guess to say about this issue. We have to actually go to the sources. We have to kneel in front of Quran and Ahl Bayt and have them share their opinions with us. It's easy for me to sit here and say, I think this is this or I think this is that, but who am I and who are you? At the end of the day, we are not coming from a position of knowledge. You're dealing with God who created you, and He's the one who's figured out life. You and I haven't figured out life. When you go to Quran and Hadith, you find that the problem that Quran and Hadith fundamentally have with music, at its very core, is beyond just some of the lyrics that you find in some of these songs. There is an active ingredient that Islam has a problem with. That is the issue of lahu. Lahu meaning the type of entertainment that makes me less likely to think about the akhirah or worry about my duties as a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The reality is there's a lot of different things in life we engage in that we may not be thinking about God while we're engaging in those activities. But Islam does not consider all of these to be haram, because the power that music has is on a different level. The amount of lahu that it can create in the life of the human being is on a different level. Hence we use the analogy of Tylenol and morphine. They both have the same apparent effect, but one of them is 10 times or hundreds of times more powerful than the other, and hence can potentially be extremely harmful and dangerous for the human being. So we said that music has a power that is generally underestimated. You and I, when we come across this topic, we say it's not a big deal. What's the power that music yields anyways? We mentioned some examples yesterday that I think helps us understand that in fact it is something that is extremely powerful, and hence you find it is so widespread. And tomorrow night we'll talk more about that. The fact that music is so widespread nowadays that even within religious gatherings, whether it's Christianity or even our own school of thought, you will find music is making its way more and more into our culture. This is where we ended our discussion. Tonight, inshallah, we'll continue this discussion by posing the following questions. Number one, this issue of lahwa that the Quran speaks about. Where does it speak about it, and how does it speak about this concept? Number two, are there verses of the Quran that speak directly on the topic of music or not? Number three, how does the ruling that our Maraji and Islam has on the issue of music demonstrate to us that Islam is a religion that can evolve with the evolving of the times and the eras? Number four, is it true that the type of music that is considered haram is the type of music that when I listen to it myself, I feel like it has a lahwi effect on me? Or is the ruling of our marajah slightly different from this? And what type of a difference is that? Number five, what is the ruling on musical instruments? Is there fundamentally an objection when it comes to engaging with musical instruments or not? Number six, what if I have a doubt about whether a certain type of music is considered haram or not? And number seven, and finally, which companion of the sixth Imam was it who had a neighbor who was engaging in parties and haram entertainment and gatherings in his house for many, many years? He considered himself to be written off from a religious perspective, except that the sixth Imam saved his akhirah with one line and one promise that he granted to him. Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. The reality is the concept of lahu comes up in multiple verses of the Quran and multiple narrations. This is a concept that the Quran goes to very frequently. In fact, you find in the verses of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as you're living life, you're engaging in the affairs of this world. That's not a problem. But make sure these affairs, la tulhikum, it doesn't bring lahu to you. Meaning, you don't engage with them in such a way that now you start to forget about your akhirah. Yes, this is a person who's so fixated on getting this job that he no longer worries about praying and fasting and doing his duties for his family. Only thing that matters to him, getting this job, making it in this career. Sometimes it's a career, sometimes it's a house, sometimes it's fame, sometimes it's his beauty or her beauty. All sorts of things can become a source of lahu in the life of the human being. And you find, for example, at the end of Surah Al-Jum'ah, which we recite on a weekly basis, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the concept of lahu. But then you find in narrations, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns the human being of lahu. So you find in Hadith Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells His servants, He says, وَأَكْثِرْ ذِكْرَ الْمَوْتِ, remember the akhirah and remember your death frequently. وَمُفَارَقَةَ الْأَهْلِينَ, and remember that time where your family can no longer help you in those moments. It's just you and your deeds. وَلَا تَلْهُ, and don't engage in lahwa. فَإِنَّ اللَّهْوَ يُفْسِدُ صَاحِبَهُ, because lahwa corrupts the one who engages in it. How does it corrupt this person? Well, because this person has forgotten about the akhirah. So tens of sins who he was immune to before, now he's more welcoming towards them because he's not thinking about consequences at this point. Therefore, you find lahu is mentioned in multiple verses of the Quran. And it is the mentioning of lahu in the verses of the Quran where the issue of music is brought up. So if someone were to ask, where is it in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that certain types of music at the very least is problematic, we will go to verses 6 and 7 from Surah Luqman. This is Surah number 31 of the Holy Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares with us people who sell or produce certain types of speech. And He says this speech that they sell is lahwi speech. Says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, these are the verses we started yesterday's lecture with, yes? وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, and amongst people there are those, يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ, he sells the type of speech that is lahwi. To do what? لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, to misguide people from the path of Allah, بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا. He wants to take the faith lightly. This is why he's producing this type of lahwi speech. And then what does the Quran say? The Quran says something very scary. أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. This person will have a humiliating punishment. The verses continue, verse number 7. وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا. When the verses of Allah are recited upon this person, وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا, he doesn't care. He turns away. He says, I don't care. كَأَنَّ فِي أُذُنَيْهِ وَقْرًا, as if he can't even hear. Yes, كَأَنْ لَمْ يَسْمَعْهَا, as if he can't even hear what we're saying to him. فَبَشِّرْهُ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. So tell him he's going to have a painful punishment. Okay, what is the sha'n and nuzul of this verse? Because when it came to this verse, you find multiple narrations from the Ahlul Bayt. Immediately they tell you that the lahwi speech that the verse is talking about, some people sell this, some people produce this. In multiple narrations, the Ahlul Bayt said this is the singing that some people do. The moment you have doubts, okay, lahwi speech, what is that? There could be a million different things you might come up with. But the Ahlul Bayt very clearly said in multiple narrations, huwa al-ghina. It is the type of singing that is done. And hence you find scholars, by extension, have added the issue of music. Of course, nowadays it's very, very rare. You will come across music that doesn't have any singing as part of it, yes? But even if it did, if it's like those types of places where it's lahwi, then the Ahlul Bayt also have a problem with that. See, this is different, brothers and sisters, from when Islam gives you a general title and you're trying to figure out the application. So Islam sometimes says, listen, respect your parents. Okay, respect my parents. What does that mean? Islam says, go figure it out on your own. Your culture, your society, so on and so forth, and all of this kind of stuff. When it came to lahwi speech that the Quran said, don't engage in it, did the Ahlul Bayt say, yeah, go figure it out on your own? Or did they immediately say, the prominent example of this lahwi speech, al-ghina. Multiple narrations of the Ahlul Bayt. Okay, so you might think to yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ فَبَشِّرُوا بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. All these things, there's going to be punishment for this person. What's the sha'n and nuzul of this verse of the Quran, Surah Luqman, verses 6 and 7? There was a man by the name of, this is one of the main sha'n and nuzuls that's mentioned for this verse. There's a man by the name of Nadr ibn Harith. Nadr ibn Harith was a businessman. He was a merchant. He used to travel between Persia and Arabia at that time. Nothing wrong so far, yes? Everything's fine. Except Nadr ibn Harith had a habit of going and listening to the fictional stories of who? Of the Persians. To do what? You might think fictional stories for what? What benefit does that have? When the Prophet of Islam came, and maybe half of his book, a third of his book, is revolving around the stories of the previous ummahs. Ad, this happened, Thamud, this happened, the people of Musa happened, this happened. And these are real stories. These are not fictional stories. These are real stories. Then every time the Prophet wanted to share with his people these stories, Nadr ibn Harith, for whatever reason, maybe he was getting paid to do this, he would come forth and say, listen, Muhammad can try to tell you the stories of Ad and Thamud, but I have better stories for you guys. Let me tell you these stories, you get entertained with these stories. You don't need to listen to this story, Musa did this, that, all of that. Come, I have stories from Rustam and this person and that person, fictional characters. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran said, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. There's going to be a humiliating punishment for him. Now here's the important point I want you to pay attention to. When God reacted to Nadr ibn Harith in this way, and for you and I, it might seem a little unusual. Is stories really that important? Back in the day, this was the media. Yeah, so this is very critical, very important. It undermined the message of the Prophet. Yes. Nowadays, technology has progressed. We may not understand stories to be that powerful or so on and so forth. But at that time, this was the media. Poetry, storytelling, this was part of the media at the time. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and says, Nadr is worthy of punishment, this and that. I ask you, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a problem with this guy coming sharing stories, you don't think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have a problem at least with some types of music that are now being produced with millions of dollars behind them to fine-tune them to the best possible way to hook you and keep your attention? Does Nadr ibn Harith have a cutting-edge studio to record in? He doesn't have that. Does he have the best of editors and DJs and this and that? He doesn't have that. Does he have the most expensive equipment out? He doesn't have any of this stuff. He's coming and telling these stories to keep people entertained. The Quran, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. I have a problem with it. Now the music that millions of dollars is invested to produce, that every single tune is fine-tuned to grab your attention. Music videos are made and dollars are spent on it. You don't think Islam would have a problem with certain types of music at least? Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know these songs, sometimes you hear these songs, yes? You assume, okay, this person was singing. No, every 2 seconds is a separate take. Every 2 seconds is a separate take. Sometimes a song that's 3.5 minutes is 70, 80 takes. Why? Because the 34th time that we took this portion of the music, it sounded a lot better than the 17th time. This type of a massive industry is behind this. Of course, Islam would have a problem with this advanced form of singing and music that we have nowadays. This is the first verse of the Quran. Then you move on to the other verses of the Quran. Recite a salawat, please. The other terminology that the Quran mentions and the Ahlul Bayt, again, they directly connect it to singing and music. Is what? Is the terminology that occurs in more than one verse of the Quran. Qawl az-zur, false speech. Ahlul Bayt have talked about this too. So the verse I recited at the very beginning, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَذِّمْ حُرُمَاتِ اللَّهِ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ وَأُحِلَّتْ لَكُمُ الْأَنْعَامُ إِلَّا مَا يُتْلَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاجْتَنِبُوا الرِّجْسَ مِنَ الْأَوْثَانِ. Stay away from worshipping the idols. وَاجْتَنِبُوا, and refrain, قَوْلَ الزُّورِ, false speech. So you might sit there and say, okay, false speech. What is false speech? Maybe you'd say, okay, lying is false speech, for example. And that could be possible. But immediately the Imam came in narrations and said what? The prominent example of false speech, al-ghina. There's no ambiguity about this. There's no vagueness about it. If you and I wanted to do the application, maybe we would say, okay, maybe it's this, maybe he was talking about backbiting. Maybe he was talking about, yes, this. And the title of false speech is a broad title, so many things can fall under it. But one thing that is for sure, the Ahlul Bayt said, definitely ghina is part of it. So even the Quran has talked about these issues. Okay, I understand, Shaykh. So the type of music that is lahwi is haram for me to listen. Now this brother Muhammad here, who's taking notes, I've never seen him take notes before. This is, mashallah, the first time. It's okay, we don't want to call out anyone by names today. It's okay. This brother says, Sheikh, I understand, wonderful. So let me go listen to all the music that's out there. The ones that I feel like has a lahwi effect on me, I'll know it's haram, I won't listen to them anymore. If Islam said the type of music that is haram for you to listen is the type of music that has a lahwi impact on you, your personal experience, then everyone has to go listen to the music before they can make a judgment on it. And hence, this is not the ruling in Islam, at least in our school of thought. This is not the ruling. It's not based on your personal experience. So when you go to the maraji', you find there is a very delicate point that they've understood from narrations, by the way. What is this delicate point? They will say, yes, the type of music that Islam has a problem with is lahwi type of music, but not lahwi type of music in terms of your personal experience. The type of music that within society is deemed to be lahwi. This makes a big difference. Big difference. So if this is the type of music that people listen to and then they're committing sins, they're doing this, they're doing that. When I listen to it, it doesn't feel like anything. Doesn't matter, it's still haram. Because this is the type of music that society deems to be what? To be lahwi. Now, if you want to get even more practical, this is Ayatollah Sistani's ruling, the second part. This first one I mentioned is Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling. Ayatollah Sistani's ruling, you're going to take it even a step further. He says, listen, if you want to be able to identify it, very easy. Go and look at haram gatherings, the type of music that is primarily played in those gatherings. Because that's where people come for lahu anyways. No one comes, to the disco to study. They come there for lahu. So Ayatollah Sistani says those places that are haram gatherings, clubs, parties, sometimes mixed weddings, and so on and so forth, the type of music that is primarily done there, the type of singing that is primarily done there, Islam has a problem with that. That is considered haram. Now, in any wedding, any gathering, anyone can play anything, but the ruling says primarily. So it has to be something that when you play it, it's understood, yeah, this is suitable for these types of haram gatherings, yes? If it has that condition, then it's considered to be haram from the Islamic perspective. Very practical now. And hence, when you listen to a certain type of music that's played, immediately the first question you have to ask yourself is this the type of music that they primarily play in places that I don't go? Places of haram. If the answer is yes, this music is haram. If the answer is no, that music is not haram. Now someone might turn around and say, but I don't feel like it has an effect on me. I'm sorry, that's not what the ruling is based on. It's not based on your personal experience. Islamic rulings sometimes are based on personal experience, sometimes they're not based on personal experience. Oh, I prayed, I don't feel spiritual. Okay, it doesn't matter, you still have to pray. It's not based on your personal experience necessarily. Yes? Now, when we come to this portion of the discussion, of course, there's always that brother who wants to act righteous. There's always that brother who wants to come after the lecture, mashallah, his head is down and he's so spiritual, yeah? So he comes up and he says, Sheikh, now, you said, the music is haram that they typically play in those places. Sheikh, I've never even been to those places. I don't even know. These haram, what is this haram gathering you're even talking about? Haram gathering what? What is this gathering you're talking Yes? And hence, he says, when I listen to music, I don't know, I have doubts. Is this the type that they play in those places, or is this not the type that they play primarily in those places? Yes? So to this brother, we say two things. First of all, nice try. Yes? We know, no, I'm just kidding. But first of all, we say the most important thing is, brothers and sisters, is to understand that Islam has a ruling for those situations when you're in doubt. Not just on music, on every issue. Islam says this is wajib, this is haram. And then you say, well, I'm doubtful. Islam will tell you. Sometimes Islam will tell you you have to take precaution. Sometimes Islam will tell you technically you don't have to take precaution. Every situation, every ruling is going to be different. On the topic of music, brothers and sisters, if I'm doubtful and I really don't know, not if I'm tricking myself, but I'm doubtful, I really don't know, well then the reality is that the rulings will allow you to listen to this music, but this is one of those places where taking precaution is highly recommended. Why? Because music has a power that we talked about. And as we will discuss, you will understand, as I get to the end of today's talk, you will understand why Islam has kept its distance with music in general. You want to take ihtiyat, you want to take it, this is one of the places you should take precaution. Is it wajib to take this precaution? No. Technically, we can't be more religious and more Catholic than the Pope. Yes? The ruling of Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, a number of other scholars, they say if you're not sure, you can listen. But should I take precaution? I would recommend in this particular. If you take that precaution when you're opening the bag of chips and you say enzyme number 54 is in here, this you should take precaution. This is one of the places where you should definitely take precaution. Okay, this is when I have doubts. Okay, I understand. Now we're going to move on to another aspect of this whole discussion, and that is musical instruments. Another loud salawat, please. Before we get to the... Before we get to the musical instruments, one point I want to mention. If you paid attention to how Islam has legislated this ruling, Islam said what? The type of music that is played in haram gatherings. The reality is, those types of music evolves over time. There's classical music in the Victorian era. They used to use it for haram gatherings. Well, now they don't use it for haram gatherings. If you played in the haram gathering, everyone's going to leave. So that music now becomes halal. But other types of music will become haram. Islam's ruling is not changing. The way the ruling applies in different times and eras is changing. You know how often I've heard this? People come to Sheikh, these maraji, they don't even know what they're doing. They can't even figure out what to do. When I was a kid, this music was a problem. Now they say it's not even a problem. No, Baba, when you were a kid, that was used in haram gatherings. Now, mashallah, you're older, no one uses it in haram gatherings. The ruling didn't change. It's the application of the ruling that has changed. And this is one of the reasons why Islam can apply to different times and different eras. Because some rules in Islam are set without any evolving in them. Fajr is always 2 rakats. And some rulings are set as rules that apply differently over time. This is part of Islam. This is why we believe the Prophet can be Khatamun Nabiyyin, because he has a religion that has both elements in it. Hence, some of the rules stay exactly the same. Some of the rules, what happens to them? They evolve. Not the ruling itself. The application of the ruling evolves over time. Yes? And one of these evolving moments that you see in Islamic fiqh is when it comes to musical instruments. Because when you look at our narrations are very harsh when it comes to musical instruments. Very harsh. So you read in Al-Kafi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the 6th Imam, he says, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam and so on and so forth and all of that, the first human beings, what did he do? Then Shaitan came up with these instruments to entertain the children of Adam. In other words, these musical instruments are the instruments of Shaitan himself. So very harsh, very harsh. So now you go knock on the door of the marja and you say, well, these musical instruments, can I engage with them or not? All of a sudden you see his stance is not as harsh as those narrations. Why? So when you go and you knock on the door of Ayatollah Sistani, what is the ruling on musical instruments? He will tell you, yes, if you come across a musical instrument that is only used for haram music, that's a problem. You cannot play that instrument. Except the issue is musical instruments have also evolved from back in the day. Back in the day, during the time of the Prophet, 90% of musical instruments were used for haram. Fast forward to today, there's tens of instruments that I can mention that are not necessarily used only for haram. They can potentially be used for haram. They can also potentially be used for what? For halal music. And hence you find, and for those who are finding this a little surprising, inshallah, you can go back and look at the rulings of Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei on the issue of alatul lahwi wal la'ib. Yes, they will tell you, yes, if you come across an instrument that's predominantly used to produce haram music, this is a problem. But you'll be hard-pressed to find an instrument like that today. Nonetheless, if you do come across something like that, sure, playing that instrument is then going to be considered haram. But as a general idea, the maraji', their ruling on the issue of instruments is a lot more flexible. Why? Because it's evolved over time. Yes, the narrations at that time were very harsh because it pretty much only had haram usage. Now things have changed. Now this process that I just did, that we just spoke of so simply, that yes, these rulings and these narrations have to do with that time. Now things are different. Brothers and sisters, this is the work of an expert. You and I cannot do this. So now Muhammad wants to come and say, yes, when the Prophet said pray Fajr before the sun comes, this was for that time. Today it no longer applies. When the Prophet said fast from dawn to dusk, this was for that time. It's the context of, no, you're not an expert. This is like surgery. If you're not careful, you'll kill the patient. When a verse or a command is specific to a particular time, takes expertise. It's not that simple. Otherwise, this person comes and says, well, hijab was something for that time. I once watched a talk on, it was a TED talk on the topic of it. She literally butchered the topic. In the very beginning, she started out, yes, hijab was a thing at that time because the custom of that time dictated. But no, it's no longer a thing because this is only related to that time. You need to be an expert to be able to know when a ruling continues over time and when it's specific to a particular time. It's a very delicate process, yes? But you find in general, Islam has kept its distance with music in general, and with musical instruments as well. Hence you find in our narrations and in our ritual practices, you might not find even one ritual practice in Islam that is tied to a musical instrument. Yes, you have in Islam that when you're giving adhan, for example, you recite beautifully. Yes. Yes, you have in Islam that when you are reciting Quran, you recite beautifully, with rhythm, so on and so forth, yes? But getting musical instruments, you find that's not a thing in Islam, while it was a thing in other faiths. So a bell, for example, yes? Or, the trumpet that they used to blow into in some of the other faiths. This was their call to prayer. What did Islam say? Islam said, I don't want to get close to these musical instruments. I want to keep my distance. So what? Time for prayer, use your own voice, recite beautifully. To that extent, no problem. But let's keep some distance from these musical instruments. Why is this? This is the reason why I said we'll come back to why it's good to take precaution on the issue of music. Yes, your marja will tell you, if you're in doubt, it's okay, you can listen to it. But this is one of those places you should take precaution. Why? Because listening to haram music, brothers and sisters, engaging with ghina, is not just a sin, it is a major sin. It is a kabira sin. How do we tell if a sin is a major sin or it's a minor sin? One of the main criteria that scholars use is when we go to the verses of the Quran. Does the Quran just say, don't do this? Or does the Quran say, don't do this, and the one who engages in this deed will have punishment? When the Quran says it will also have punishment, they say, this is a sign that this is a really big deal. Now in Surah Luqman, did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say there are people who sell lahwi speech, they shouldn't be doing this? Or did he say he shouldn't be doing this? أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. They have a severe punishment. Kabira sin. And hence we have to be very careful. Now someone might say, well, Shaykh, it's difficult. Music sounds good. Don't worry, I know. Of course, we're human beings, we have desires, but that's why you're dealing with Arhamur Rahimeen. You're dealing with the one who, when you come to him with your whole bag of sins, as long as you take accountability, his forgiveness is going to be there for you. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't expect from us perfection. He expects from us submission to submit. Ya Allah, you said this is haram and you said this is a big deal. I'm going to take it as a big deal. Now, if sometimes shaitan tricks me, oh Allah, I need your forgiveness. Compare this to the person who says, oh, that's really difficult, so forget about it. It's not a big deal. Whatever. You know what we do quite often? Instead of raising ourselves to the standards of our faith, you know what we do? We pull down the faith to where we are. Music is all around me. I'm used to it. I listen to it, so on and so forth. Okay, so you're going to say it's a difficult thing to deal with. Okay, I'm with you. I understand. But acknowledge it's a big deal in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Acknowledge it's a sin. Now you say, I fall short. No problem. We all fall short. You fall short with this. Maybe I fall short with something else. Everyone has their own struggle. But don't sit there and pull down the faith to where you are to make yourself feel comfortable. Then he sits there and says, it's not a big deal. No, don't play with God's faith. Try to elevate yourself, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold your hand in this process. Yes? And there were people who engaged in haram entertainment, in haram gatherings their whole lives. But then sometimes something clicks in the human being that all of a sudden this person sets aside all of this. And of these people was an individual who was the neighbor of one of the famous companions of the sixth Imam by the name of Abu Basir. Abu Basir was the famous companion of Al-Imam As-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Parents? One more loud salawat, please. صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. This famous companion by the name of Abu Basir had a neighbor. Abu Basir himself didn't engage in this type of stuff. Abu Basir was a close companion of the 5th and 6th Imam. He has a very high status. Except he had a neighbor who used to engage in these types of issues. And so he shares this story, and this is from Al-Kafi. He says, I had a neighbor who was living life, but he got very close to the Sultan of the time. The Sultan, the Khalifa or the governor of the city, granted him a lot of wealth. Because of this wealth that he received from the Khalifa or from the Sultan, now he started to add luxury to his life. And part of adding luxury to his life was, of course, he wanted to have these parties and these haram gatherings in his house. As part of that, he had purchased a number of female singers. He used to pay them. They used to come and sing. Yes. Except the problem is, this is Abu Basir's neighbor. So if there's a concert next door, naturally, it's going to be playing in your house too. Yes, the houses are close and they're small and all of this kind of stuff. Abu Basir says, a number of times I was walking, coming and going, I'd hear this music, and I just, complain about him to myself, meaning deep down I said, I wish he would stop doing this. This is very bothersome. Except I didn't know what to do. He says, one day I went and I knocked on his door. I said, Fulan, this stuff you do, you have to stop doing this stuff. This is haram, it's not allowed, so on and so forth. You know this. He turned to me, he said, listen, Ya Abu Basir, Anta rajulun mu'afa, wa ana rajulun mubtala. He said, listen, I'm a person who's struggling with his desires. Anta rajulun mu'afa, you're doing well. You're good. You've been practicing this whole time and so on and so on. I'm struggling. So I can't set aside this stuff. But I do have one request from you. And that one request from you is that when you go and speak to your friend Ja'far ibn Muhammad, this is the 6th Imam, when you go and speak to him, recite a salawat please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When you go and see him, tell him about my situation. Maybe he can help with something. Maybe he can come up with some solution to my situation. Otherwise, I'm very much a done deal, is what the friend of Abu Basir is telling him. Abu Basir says, sure. I walked away. I traveled. I went to Medina. When I went to Medina, I visited the 6th Imam. When I visited the 6th Imam, I asked the 6th Imam, I said, I have a neighbor. He's engaged in this and that. He told me to tell you about his situation. Look at what the 6th Imam said. The first thing, this is a sinner, open sinner. The first thing the Imam said, he said, when you go back, first and foremost, send him my salams and my regards. When you go back, أقرئه السلام عني. Go and give my regards and salams to him. Sinner, open sinner. Then he said, listen, tell your friend that I said the following. Tell him to leave this haram habit that he has. وَأَنَا أَذْمَنُ لَهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْجَنَّةِ. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. He said, tell him to leave this habit that he has, and I will guarantee for him heaven. Abu Basir says, I came back. I went. When I came back, people came to visit me in my house. Friends came, relatives came, so on and so forth. Then when this man came, I told him, فَاحْتَبَسْتُهُ. I told him, hold on, I have to tell you something. When everyone else left, وَخَلَى مَنْزِلِي, and my house was now empty, I turned to him, I said, you remember you told me to tell Ja'far ibn Muhammad about your situation? I told Ja'far ibn Muhammad about your situation. He said, okay, what did he say? He said, first of all, he said, send him my regards and my salam. And secondly, tell him that if he leaves this habit, I will guarantee for him heaven. The moment he heard these words, he started to cry. He said, Allah, Allah. قال هذا جعفر ibn Muhammad. Ja'far ibn Muhammad said this to you? He gave this promise to you? Abu Basir said, yes, this is the promise that the Imam gave to me. He said, okay. He walked out. Abu Basir says, a number of days passed. As a number of days passed, I saw a knock on the door. When I went to the door, I found it's my neighbor. Except my neighbor, he's dressed differently and he's doing things differently. He's standing behind the door. He's embarrassed to even come from behind the door so I can see him properly. I said, what's going on? What do you need? He said, do you have any food or some clothes that I can wear? I said, Fulan, you had all this wealth and so on and so forth. Why do you need this food? And he said, yes, when Ja'far ibn Muhammad said that stuff, I started to change my life, yes? I started to give away a lot of the wealth that I had in the path of Allah. I even went further. Some of the same clothes that I used to wear myself, I even gave in the path of Allah. Do you have something that I can wear, some food? Abu Basir says, I came back. I went to some of my friends. I grabbed some clothing and some food. I brought it and I gave it to my neighbor. He says, days passed. All of a sudden, my neighbor got sick. He was ill. He says his illness continued. Physicians came. They said, listen, there's no more hope for him. It's time for him to go. He says in those moments, as it was time for him to go, he was fainting and he was coming back. And he was fainting and he was coming back. Except Abu Basir says, as I was sitting beside him, the last time that he was conscious, he looked at me and he said, Ya Abu Basir, your friend did what he said he was going to do. قَدْ وَفَى لَنَا صَاحِبُكَ. The promise your friend gave to me, he held up his end of the promise. Abu Basir says he closed his eyes and he took his final breath. Abu Basir, Abu Basir says, I made my way back to Hajj. So I went for Hajj. The sixth Imam was there. And he says, when I came to enter into the house where the Imam was staying, he says, and this is the wording of the narration, he says, when I put my first foot into the house, my second foot hadn't made it into the house. All of a sudden, the sixth Imam from the other room, he called out. He said, Ya Abu Basir, قَدْ وَفَيْنَا لِصَاحِبِكَ. We did for your friend what we had promised that we would do for him. قَدْ وَفَيْنَا لِصَاحِبِكَ. His place is in heaven. We told him, set aside this habit and I will guarantee for you Jannah. And this is the Ahlul Bayt, the kindness that they have. And the mercy that they have, and then you see what happened to them on the 10th of Muharram and in the plains of Karbala. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya Ibn Rasulullah. There are instances before the plains of Karbala come to life where you find the mercy and the kindness and the compassion of Imam al-Hussein. But that kindness and compassion is even more special when it directly relates to the issue and the topic of water itself. And hence you find when the army of Hur came and they wanted to stop the Imam from the path that he was on, the Imam found that some of his companions in the army of Hurr are thirsty. And the narration says Hussein took from his own water, and he started to give of this water to people who would later on come back and deprive him of this water. And the companion of Hur says, I was the last one in the troops of Hur. When I caught up with the small army that Hur had, I saw Hussein is taking water. He's handing out water to everyone. He's giving out this mashk to everyone. Everyone is drinking. He said, I picked up this mashk and I started to drink from it, except it was difficult for me to drink from the water skin, to drink from the mashk, because the water was pouring left and right. He says, all of a sudden I saw Hussein came. He held up the water skin properly so I could drink properly from this water that he's giving to me. This is the mercy of Hussein. And then what did they do to the body of Hussein? What did they do to the tents of Hussein? What did they do to the children of Hussein? After the 10th of Muharram came to an end, on the 11th, when they want to take this family away, the heads are on the spears. Imagine what happens to a loved one when they see the head of their loved one on the spear. What does this do to their hearts anyways? And then the narration says one thing that the army of Umar ibn Sa'd did is that they wanted to have these captives pass through the bodies of the shuhada. Do you know what happened to the hearts of Zainab? Do you know what happened to the hearts of Kulthum? Do you know what happened to the hearts of Sukayna in those moments? The narration says they brought them. Some of them hands are already tied. The moments they came to the bodies of the shuhada, they threw themselves off these camels. They came and sat, maybe every one of them with a different of the shuhada, with a different body of the shuhada. The narration says the daughter of Hussein, of course, came and threw herself on the body of Hussein. Sukayna came and embraced the body of Hussein. This body that doesn't look the way it used to look, that doesn't seem to be the way it used to be. Now it has arrows in it. Now it has spears in it. Because in those final moments, everyone attacked Hussein with whatever they had. It didn't matter if it was an arrow, a spear, a stone, a rock. It didn't matter. Now this body is lying there. The narration says Sukayna came and threw herself on this body. The pain was so much, Sukayna fainted in those moments and saw her father in this dream. And what did Hussein say to her? Hussein said to her lines that burn our heart 1400 years later. Hussein said to Sukayna, Sukayna, remember these lines from me, that whenever you see someone who's drinking some water, anytime you have a chance to drink some water, فَذْكُرُونِي, remember me. Remember the one who didn't have water to drink. أَوْ سَمِعْتُمْ بِغَرِيبٍ أَوْ شَهِيدٍ فَانْدُبُونِي. Whenever you come across someone who is lonely, who has no one to look out for them, who's left alone by themselves, فَانْدُبُونِي, remember me. I was the one who was left alone on the 10th of Muharram with nowhere to go. And then the lines of the poetry continues, and Hussein speaks of one painful moment on the 10th of Muharram. He says, Shi'ati laytakum fi yawm Ashura jami'an tanzuruni. My followers, my lovers, I wish you were there on the 10th of Muharram to witness this one moment. Hussein, what was this one moment that was so painful for you, that was so difficult for you? He says, out of all the things that I went through on the 10th of Muharram, I wish you were there in this one moment to witness this one moment. What is this one moment, Hussein? What did it do to your heart, O Hussein? He says that one moment, كَيْفَ أَسْتَسْقِي لِطِفْلِي, the way I was asking for water for my child. فَأَبَوْا أَن يَرْحَمُونِي. They disregarded my request. They didn't give water to my Ali al-Asghar. What happened to Hussein? The narration says Hussein came back to the tents and he turned to Zainab. He said, Zainab, nawilini waladi Ali. Give me my son Ali. Maybe Zainab is worried. Maybe Zainab's hands are trembling. Hussein, what do you want Ali for? Some narrations say Hussein wanted to go and ask for water. Some narrations are even more painful. They say Hussein came just to say goodbye to his son, just to say his farewell to his son. The moment he embraced his son Ali al-Asghar in his hands, all of a sudden this three-headed arrow struck the body of Ali. It struck the neck of Ali al-Asghar. What happened to Hussein in those moments? What happened to Zainab in those moments? What happened to his mother in those moments? Only Allah knows. Imagine Hussein in the plains of Karbala, holding this child in his hands. Blood is everywhere. And the only thing that he says is, Hawwana alay, it's easy for me, oh Allah, just because you're the one who's watching. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Let us take our hearts to the plains of Karbala. Let us send our salams to our beloved Imam. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati halat بفنائك عليك مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. Everyone. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب ورحمة الله وبركاته. رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين.
Inshallah, we'll do salat and then latmiya after.
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا